Hi,
Nice to meet you. I'm Angela.
I'm Olivia. It's nice to meet you too. Yeah, I figured we would start by just kind of introducing ourselves. So my name's Olivia and my pronouns are she, they, and I'm the communications director at Therapy Access Project. So I think you've probably looked at our social media maybe a little bit because that's how we connected to do this interview. But our primary purpose is to help match Black, Brown, Indigenous, and queer individuals with therapists that validate their identities and lived experiences. But we are also working towards making resources and information more accessible, specifically for those who have been either disproportionately served or in many instances harmed by the current mental health care system and how it operates. So yeah, if you just wanted to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me. I'm really supportive of the work that y'all do. I've engaged before. I've also received referrals from you in the past, and so this is just a cool opportunity. My name is Angela. I use they, she pronouns. I'm queer, neurodivergent, and mostly able-bodied. Throughout the interview, I might get up to stretch or move around. My desk height might change just
Okay.
as to you. And then I don't always make direct eye contact. I might fidget or do some of those things, but just kind of giving you a heads up of what to expect in having conversation with me.
Yeah, thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we can get into the questions if you'd like. You kind
I
of told us.
had I had a couple of questions
Yeah.
first in the recording, but swearing, yes or no?
Yes, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Just I was like typing some notes and I'm like, I should see first if this is or
Yeah,
not.
that should be completely fine. Yes.
Any topics or triggers you personally have that you want me to avoid while we're having conversation today?
No, but are there any for you that you would like me to?
None specifically, but given the topics, we'll be talking about like fat liberation and some disability advocacy stuff, and things
Yeah.
that potentially triggering to the audience. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
check in with where you were at with those things.
Yeah, and we'll likely do like a trigger warning, especially depending on how the interview goes. So we'll just see, what comes up in conversation with the questions and then go from there.
Okay.
But thank you for joining us for this interview. I'm really excited to be able to engage in this conversation and learn from you. And I'm hoping that our audience will be able to learn a lot of things from the information that you were able to share about your work. So I'm really excited and thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm ready to get into it. If you're ready to get into it, I have one last question, which is, do you have any time constraints?
The Zoom might only last 40 minutes. I think that would be the only time constraint. I'm
Okay.
working on getting like a Zoom that would be able to do longer. But this is the free platform. So yeah, it might cut off, but we'll see how long it goes. I don't really anticipate it being that much longer or more than 40 minutes, but we'll see. Um,
Okay, cool.
yeah. So the first question, what made you want to become a somatic coach?
Well, I wanted to help people. I've always been in a helping or human services profession, but I specifically wanted to help people to better understand their minds and their bodies. And rather than thinking about them as like two systems, like an apartment complex, for example, like your brain's over here and your body's over here, thinking of them more as roommates and how we can cohabitate with each other, better understand what's happening. I think a lot of people look for like, what's going on right now, or why is this happening, instead of how do I feel? And so bringing people closer towards themselves really was one of the reasons that somatic coaching spoke to me. The model also gives me a chance to bring more of an individualized approach to the space versus like choose one of these 5 insurance approved interventions,
Yeah.
uh, which is really cool because I primarily work with neurodivergent folks. So being able to ask people like, what color is your nervous system? Does it have a texture? Does it remind you of something? Having the space to do that and really work collaboratively with people is awesome.
Yeah.
And then my own experiencing with somatic therapy and embodiment, especially as I was recovering from several injuries, having worked crisis mental health, and just learning to be in a in my own body, and so and the value and benefit of that, and wanting to give that to other people.
I love that. I love that it so strongly comes from you wanting to help others, but to do it differently than what the mental health care system as it operates normally gives people. So I love that. Um, so the next question, can you share more about your journey towards an abolitionist-oriented therapeutic coaching model, particularly your decision to divest from licensure and focus on supporting individuals in therapy deserts?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a content warning, loss of life on this one. So when I was in grad school and doing my supervision, I was in a situation where I felt very exploited. You're doing a lot of free or low paid labor. And my supervisor passed away suddenly, having not signed any of my supervision hours. There's not really anything you can do
Mm.
for that. So I had to redo them. And in doing that, I was at a different facility and I was not liking what I was seeing. Just the way that caseloads were being managed or not being managed. And so I really wanted to take the skills I already had, but move away from behaviorism because it's trash, um, and towards somatics. But I didn't see myself going through the supervision process again. And
Yeah.
quite honestly, at a price point, it was inaccessible. I put my last grad school classes on a Costco credit card. So it's kind of getting tapped financially. And I started talking to other colleagues and people had done similar things and decided that the coaching model was the way to go for a couple of different reasons. One, it enables me to see people all over the world, which is super awesome because not everybody can find a therapist or a mental health provider that looks like them, understands their identity, understands their culture. And so I see a lot of people who tend to only have old, pale, and stale options for therapy. A lot of religious oriented therapy that queer folks especially are not looking for. Um, and so that's one of the really cool things about having a abolitionist and coaching oriented model. I will say using the coaching phrasing does protect me from state licensing boards, which I have had run-ins with in the past where they're like, you're providing licensed therapy. I'm like, no, everywhere it says this is not that. Um, but I didn't want to have to follow guidelines like mandatory reporting or engaging in interventions that lead to psychiatric incarceration. And I felt that divesting from licensure was the best way to support people in the way that I wanted to, but minimize the liability to myself and not following the rules.
Yeah.
Because if the rules are call the cops, I'm out.
Right. Yeah, I definitely understand that. And I love how the model that you've chosen to go with and how you've chosen to interact with people in a mental health space, actually gives them more options and able to, communicate better about themselves, rather than them feeling like they have to withhold things to avoid, having 911 called on them.
I
And
mean, absolutely. I have clients who they'll come in, like when we're first starting to get to know each other, I'll ask about things like self-harm, and they're like, well, like in the past, but not, and I can tell that there's something they're holding back. And I'm like, I'm not gonna call the cops on you,
yeah,
or we're not gonna engage in psychiatric incarceration or mental health hospital if that's not what you want. So what's going on? And
yeah,
so we talk a lot about harm reductive engagement. So that might look like in terms of, for example, self-injury, or self-harm, good aftercare, wound care, cleaning. And then the other thing too, and why I love the coaching model is I get to go, all right, we're not going to call the cops. We're not going to put you in the mental hospital. What does it feel like? What happens before you do it? What are you looking for? And then we can co-create harm reductive strategies and interventions to really support the person versus being like, ooh, I gotta call someone about that. And you can't go to work tomorrow and we're gonna fuck up your whole life.
yeah.
Thanks for telling me.
Right. Yeah, it definitely depletes that trust that you might be able to, or have even like built with the individual that you're engaging with your healing. Um, yeah, I think that's awesome, especially, it takes the shame away from it as well, because it feels like then you can actually talk about, okay, so that was one of my coping mechanisms, but also helping through like this is how I'm going to take care of this
Mhm.
after this has happened. So, yeah, that's awesome. So the next question, You indicated that you have previously worked in disability services across multiple states. Can you discuss some of the challenges you've observed within these systems and how they impact individuals' mental health and well-being?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to name for accountability that as someone who has formerly worked in these systems, I have been part of the problem and upheld some of these interventions myself. And while I've quote unquote done the work to move away from that, I still know that I have caused harm to individuals in my work in disability services. But coming back to your question, I think that low staffing, poor training or no training, overworked, underpaid, it just equals shitty care. And that's something I've seen consistently across 5 states and more than a decade of work. I think it really impacts people's patients, especially direct caregivers or people working with folks with high support needs.
Mhm.
And so, impacting patients, follow through, advocacy, and support. One of my roles as a former behavior specialist was determining clinical efficacy for restricting or limiting rights, something in the state of Oregon that's called individually based limitations or IBLs. So, for example, if you have a client who, let's say, is diabetic and they go into the kitchen and they're slamming back sugar, staff and management might say, hey, we should lock the cabinet. And they'll ask me to write a clinical reason why the cabinet should be locked for this person's safety to restrict their rights. And I kept receiving pushback when I'd say things like, why don't we just buy sugar packets and then only have 5 sugar packets in the kitchen? Or what are the staff doing that this person is able to unattended go into the kitchen and slam a whole bag of sugar? Like, that's not a slow process.
Yeah.
And continually hearing, oh, we don't have the staff for that. We don't have the time for that. They don't know how to. And between that and seeing the infantilization, and that just strengthens power dynamics, and that can lead to isolation and codependence and a variety of other really sticky challenges. I think that the crux of that really is just staffing and training and the wage inequity between like management and people directly providing support for people in disability services.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're just making me think of a lot because my full-time job is working at a shelter for individuals experiencing homelessness. So I also write some of the policies around, do we have to have clear cups when moving through the shelter?
Right.
Because we're also a sober living facility. So there's, using a reductive framework for that instead of like more incarceral or taking away like fully taking away autonomy of people. Like it's yeah.
And I think part of where people don't think about it is there's so much infantilization when people have support needs, regardless of whether that's disability or housing, communication support needs. And when you're infantilizing, I think it reinforces the power structure at the top of this person needs me to be in charge, needs me to decide what's right for them,
Yeah.
versus letting people decide what's best for them and then helping support them to make those decisions.
Yeah. And giving them an informed decision instead of just saying, I know what's best for you and this is why we're doing this.
Yeah, there's a really big push on the West Coast for person-centered services, but my perspective on that is provider-centered. Like, how can we make it easiest for the people doing the work versus how
Mhm.
can we make it easy or supportive for everybody involved?
Mhm.
Also see really high rates of burnout in those professions, yours included, and that can diminish care for sure.
Right. Yeah. So the next question, can you explain how you integrate the principles of health at every size and fat liberation into your coaching practice?
Yeah, so I lived most of my life as a fat person, and while I'm now in a mid-sized body, I first became familiar with HAES after, unsurprisingly, horrible trash interactions with medical providers. I wanted I want to preface this with the HAES conversation, noting that the Association of Size, Diversity, and Health was is working to decouple their mission from the initial works of Lindo Bacon, who's sometimes considered the founder of HAES, but he's not, and he's a thin-bodied white dude. So just kind of naming that. Um, but I like to weave concepts of health at every size and fat liberation into my work through the lens of neutrality. We don't have to say we love our bodies, especially if you don't believe it. Like people like, oh, say affirmations and look in the mirror. I'm the last person to tell my clients, we even joke about it. I'm like, I'm not going to tell you to look in the mirror. But can you be neutral about your body, about food, about movement? And I think somatics is really beautiful, a beautiful tool for this because it supports people to get to the root of their perceptions. There's this kind of like the issues are in the tissues, and I'm a firm believer of that. And I think that body liberation, not just fat liberation, is about recognizing dehumanization through body hierarchies. This body's better than that body because whatever arbitrary reason people in power have decided. And then we look at how capitalism profits from this ideology. I ask my clients all the time, and they're like, I want to lose weight, or I think I need to try Ozempic or something like that. Well, why? What do you want to feel like? Well, I want to be thin. Well, what do you want to feel like?
Yeah.
And we kind of work through that. And once we make the connections of like, this is targeted advertising, this is being sold and packaged to you. Do you still want the thing? Now that you know that it's being target marketed to you? Oh, well, actually, I don't know if that resonates with me and my belief system. So we really work to do a lot of deconstructing of how we all got to believe that we need to be thin, that we need to be able-bodied, that we need to be X, Y, or Z to be valued in society.
Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking through how are you saying how we got here, through the systems and through white supremacy and colonization of our minds and our systems and the way that we perceive individuals and how their bodies are and what purpose that has served to make individuals and their bodies quote unquote better or more valuable in society.
One of the conversations I have with people a lot too is around how people in power, particularly white people, have this power structure, and then they uphold that and create rules around the body, even beyond fat liberation. The intersection of queerness, for example, I have folks who cannot receive gender affirming surgery because of BMI, which is inherently racist and
Yeah.
anti-Black, anti-fat, anti-disabled community. And so I think about things like that when I'm working with my clients through the fat liberation and Hayes lens.
The next question, do you incorporate principles of disability justice into your practice? If so, what does this look like for you?
Yes, I do, but I'm not going to talk about all 12 because we've got time to stuff. So primarily intersectionality, people are complex, we're not a monolith. I talk a lot about masking with my clients because I primarily work with neurodivergent folks, but we talk about layers or the thickness of a mask. So for example, as an autistic person, I have social masks. So if I'm going to be in this setting or that setting, these are the social rules for this place. Well, then I've got whatever trauma layers on top of that. So that's academic trauma, workplace trauma, familial trauma, those masks, those learned behaviors, maybe people pleasing. Then you've got the racial masks. Well, I'm not really a white passing person. I am ethnically ambiguous. I confuse people. I've got curly hair. I'm a Filipino American, but most people wouldn't identify me that way. So I've got those masks to wear. And then the mask of queerness, so the cis mask, depending on where you're at. And so intersectionality is a big part of what I support my clients to unpack and understand how all of those layers influence them. The other cornerstone of Taco Cat and my practice as it relates to disability justice is anti-capitalism. So from the inception of Taco Cat, before I ever really started seeing clients, I wrote out my core values so I could come back to them regularly to avoid getting twinkly-eyed by affiliate marketing and whatever else is available. So I keep 10% of my practice is full scholarship, and then 15% is partial. I do a sliding scale where people self-select. I don't ask for income verification or anything like that. And then also done pay what you can groups, which was super cool to see because there are about 40 people participating across 3 groups. And the model was show up and pay whatever you can. If it's nothing, cool. If it's $50, cool. If it's $5, cool. And if that changes from meeting to meeting, also cool. And we were able to bring in the exact amount of funds needed across that 12-week stretch, with about 50% of people paying and 50% of people attending for free. And the people who paid and were free attendees changed from week to week too. So it's like socialism live happening. Really neat. And then the other side of that, of course, as it relates to disability justice, is cross-disability solidarity. So not just considering mental disabilities, but also physical disabilities, COVID considerations. Part of why we've refrained from hosting any in-person events is because of accessibility issues in the area, and just finding venues with masking policies. So I think those are the ways that we primarily look at and weave in the principles of disability justice into the work.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorites is the leadership of those most impacted. I see that one, definitely not shown in the work that I do, but I'm, advocating for that. I love the ones that you're including in your practice, as I mean, obviously including all of them, but the ones you're heavily focusing on. And especially that, like, the community care shown through those group sessions that you were doing, where not only are you helping to care for your community, they're helping to care for you back, and getting those funds covered, and being able to do that. So I love that. In your opinion, oh wait, sorry. Do you work towards decolonizing your practice? If so, what does this look like for you?
Yes, absolutely. And I sometimes joke with my clients that even modern day psychology, mental health is still very much rooted in psychoanalysis. And Freud was just some old white dude who was doing coke and sleeping with all of his clients. So if we're going to base our foundation for mental health on something, let's not let it be that. All of the information that I paid money for and time to learn is rooted in colonization, and even mandatory report carceral interventions, all of that is rooted in colonization and supremacy. And I think being able to take what you like and leave what you don't, and there's way more that I'm leaving the further I get along in my unlearning and reorienting than I'm keeping with me. And I also have a unique experience where I started my psychology undergrad in the DSM-4 and then went through the 5 in grad school, the 5 at the end of undergrad and into grad school. And so even the stuff I learned initially is technically wrong in the field of psychology at this point. So I think it's about recognizing that you've got to move away from pathologizing human experiences, especially when so much of what people are experiencing are side effects of colonial structures and oppressive systems. I think part of how that decolonization work shows up at the individual level is working with my clients to understand how their thoughts have been conditioned by colonization. So for example, like many of us have been taught, sold that body hair is bad and should be removed. And so when I have clients talking about something, I go, why?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I'm like, okay, well, what makes smoothness in this example better? Oh, that's right. There was a narrative that women of color were unkempt or unruly or savage because of thicker or darker hair. So if you don't want to be deemed an unruly savage by those with power, you better shave your legs. And it's like, when you really pull that back and examine it, it's white supremacist. It is, you know, capitalistic, and those two things together create such a negative impact in the way people view themselves and perceive each other even.
Yeah, and it definitely ties into the body liberation aspect as well of your practice. Seeing your body as, whole, and not something that, you need to change in order to meet society's, standard of what is okay.
Yeah, I think for many folks, especially for AFAB folks, we're born being taught how to hate ourselves. And so as you age, you have to learn how to be neutral or better to yourself. And depending on how old you are and what your lived experience is, that's a lot of shit to unpack.
Yeah.
And then you're still being marketed to and
Right.
sold at all of the time.
Right. Even in that, like, and then they tie it into like self-care that like, oh yeah, like take your bath with your bath bomb that you bought and then your razors that you also had to buy and all the stuff that comes along with it, you know. Yeah.
I keep seeing a targeted ad for some app that's like somatic movement, but it's this woman who's conventionally beautiful and attractive, and she's like getting thinner over the 28 days to heal her nervous system or some shit. And it's like, one, you can't heal your nervous system in any particular time frame, so you're already being lied to. Two, you're not specifically going to lose weight, and if that's your goal in trying to be embodied, maybe examine your goal.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to like how do you want to feel? Because
Mhm.
like your weight isn't like it can have cause you to have feelings obviously like with the way you are forced to move through this world with not being accessible to um but like how do you truly want to feel in your body, and a lot of that has to do with how others are perceiving you and there's shame attached to that it has been specifically placed there for reasons.
Right. It's like, do you want to be thin because you feel physically bad in your large body, or do you want to be thin because you don't want to have to buy two airplane seats?
Right. Yeah. Okay, so in your opinion, how can mental health practitioners better support marginalized communities, particularly those who face intersecting forms of oppression such as racism, ableism, and fat phobia?
I think first thing is know your lane. You can be an ally and still not be the right fit for everyone. Don't take it personally. I had someone a year ago, a Black trans client, say they didn't feel like I got it because I'm not Black. And I was like, yeah, bet. Do you want me to help you find somebody who's Black? And then we did. And I think they're fine now. Or, they're matched with somebody who's a better fit. And keeping in mind, we're all problematic, all people, myself included. Be open to being challenged, to admitting your biases, continually unlearning, reorienting, and just being like chill to admit you're wrong. It's okay to not know everything about everything. And I'm straight up with my clients about that. Like, if you ask me a question I don't know, I'm not going to bullshit you. Like, we can consult the internet together. I think it might be this. I can ask a friend or a colleague. Um, I think the other side is, look, understanding how each person's identities intersect and impact them and knowing that'll be different. It's
Mhm.
no different than assuming that all people with anxiety fear public speaking. Like, people are individuals and they're the experts on their experience. That is the most important part. I think looking at your social circles and your community engagement. Are you an echo chamber? That's another one. I think lastly, the intersections of racism, ableism, and fat phobia impact everything from your ability to access and go to the grocery store, to how much money you have to even spend there, to whether or not the store nearest you feels safe, carries your cultural foods, or is accessible physically for you. And this is what it means when we talk about intersectionality. It's not that identities run through each other like cross streets. They're intricately connected and intertwined.
Yeah, I had something to say, but I forgot it. What's it? I might come back to it. Okay.
Okay.
So, what strategies do you employ to create culturally sensitive and inclusive healing spaces?
Non-judgment and curiosity are definitely a big part of that, especially when speaking about people's cultural and spiritual practices. We've got a few folks who practice animism, for example, or read tarot, and they receive what they call downloads. I'm not here to pathologize those experiences or tell you that they're bad for you or problematic in any way. I like to ask people how they feel when they engage in them and if they're feeling / getting what they want to out of those things. And then if not, supporting them to explore those reasons. I think unpacking my own shit. I was raised by a white supremacist, and as a brown person, that's kind of a mind fuck. And so having to really look at my own beliefs and what I'm bringing into the space, doing my own, I hate the phrasing doing the work, but doing my own work, to really make sure that I'm aware of how that shows up in the coaching and therapeutic space. And then lastly, I think understanding intergenerational trauma and family dynamics and how they relate to culture is super important. So like, for example, in the Filipino community, it's really common to see some like random auntie once a year who's going to grab your tummy, tell you you're fat, and then also tell you to grab a second plate of food. Knowing what that looks like and where people are at in terms of assimilating to American or white culture versus how close they are to their culture of origin, all of that makes a big difference in being able to support them to get to the roots of their triggers and understand their somatic responses.
Yeah, you kind of sparked what I had been thinking about saying with the last question, and it does tie into this one about like when I talk to my friends and then also applicants for Therapy Access Project, like understanding that your therapist might have some of the might have some shared identities, but not all. But they should at least be willing to like understand better, and a good sign of if you're going to be able to go on a healing journey with this individual that is, maybe not productive, that's the wrong word because that's, very capitalistic, but that's a healing journey that's like, you know, you want to be
Supportive and a good
yeah,
fit, and like
yeah,
therapy and healing can be uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable. You want to feel generally comfortable with the person supporting you.
yeah. And so a good sign of that is just a therapist that's willing to say that you even feel comfortable with saying, that's maybe not exactly how I would say that and how I feel most comfortable being represented. Like being able to say, like, I'm not comfortable with that. Do you mind if I share some information with you about myself or about what I've learned about this identity or my identity or whatever it is you're talking about, and them being open to having a dialogue with you rather than seeing themselves as the person who knows more about that, being able to say I I lack information about that, and even if maybe you don't lack information but it's the wrong information that you've been fed through schooling, that is, yeah.
Exactly. And I think another side of this too is not just being open to being wrong, but being open to admitting fault too when you give wrong information. Like, oh, hey, last week I told you this thing and I went back and looked at it and actually it's this. There's so much power. There's so many power dynamics in healing spaces. And I work to try to minimize those to the extent it's appropriate,
Mhm.
based on each person. Some people really need and kind of want that formal power structure. I'm the therapist or the provider, and you're the client. And some people want more of a conversational, casual, friendly type vibe. And so, really like reading the room and knowing what people are seeking.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how your practice has enabled you to make it so individualistic for each individual, and that's what it seems like how you've operated from.
When I was working in disability services, we used to use a software where you'd pick like skills for kiddos to learn, and they were all identical. So it'd be like, we're going to learn shapes in this order, and then we're going to learn colors in this order. I'm like, no, how about we just go pink, purple, yellow instead of red, yellow, green? I'm like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, but
Why?
Timmy's favorite color is purple. No, we can't do that. And it's like, there's a better way, y'all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's it. Like just recognizing that there is a better way and you're always going to learn more to help make other people's healing journey more suited towards them, and yeah.
And learning something for one client doesn't take away from the next person that you support. It enhances the support you provide throughout your career.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any tips for those going to therapy about how they can get more out of their session?
Yes, I like to start my sessions by asking folks a couple things. One, do you want to do like embodied work mostly today? Unless we already have some predetermined plan. Do you need to rant or bitch about anything? Do you need to just let some shit out? You want to problem solve or some combination of the three? Um, I think people can ask themselves those questions before they go into the therapy space. Like, how do I want to feel when I leave this appointment? What do I need from this space? I think taking notes throughout the week, my clients have the ability to kind of brain dump, text or email me things they're thinking as they think of them. And I'll come back and be like, okay, so you sent me this text at 2 a.m. on Wednesday now that just said grocery shopping. What's up with that? And then please write stuff down. If you can't write stuff down, ask your therapist if they can do a live transcript for you or a recording. It's hard to remember everything, and you really want to get your value out of the time and energy and effort that you're putting into the space. And also tell your therapist what you want or need. You hired us, and even if you're getting the service pro bono, you still chose us and we're still providing care to you.
Yeah.
It's like I've got a couple clients who've asked me not to let them talk about like school or their spouse or their job for more than 10 minutes. And I think being able to feel comfortable enough to tell your therapist what you want from the session is super important. If you don't feel comfortable to tell your therapist, like, I do want that, I don't want that, or even while you're doing something, be like, not today.
Yeah.
All of those things should be on the table for you. And if they're not, you should examine the relationship you have with your provider.
Yeah. I love the idea of having a therapist write down like what kind of conclusions you might have come to during that session, or what they've learned during that session, or just tracking that for yourself, because I think that that's really important to like kind of look at where you were at in that session and how that applies and to your larger lived experience.
I do a shared document with all of my clients. Some people use it, some people don't. And then while we're in the session, I'll be like, do you want to write that down? And sometimes, we're in a forward fold and they're doing deep breathing and they're like, no, can you write it down? And I'll write it down in the shared document. And that's a really good, I think, accessibility tool for people
Yeah.
too. Because again, when you're crying, you're in your feels, you're maybe dysregulated, you're probably not going to remember the like little gold nugget you got out of your session.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, that was the last question. I did want you to be able to plug your website and socials, but I'll also include it anywhere it's posted. That'll all be like you'll be tagged and all of that. So it's Taco Cat Wellness, right? TacoCatWellness.com. And then your Instagram is Taco Cat Wellness, and LinkedIn is Angela Rockwell Wellness, or
Rock Wellness.
oh,
I played off my
okay.
last name a little bit.
I like that. It's easy to remember. Okay. But yeah, all of it will be cited in any of the posts that we make. But thank you so much for engaging in this conversation with me and being willing to answer these questions. And